Hello, my name is Ron Orr. I am a student at Arizona State University. I'm working towards my master's in applied leadership and management from Thunderbird School of Global Management. Presenting an analysis today for one of my classes. It's TAM 530, data analysis. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be a data analyst for a major global company. This major global company has 4 other companies around the world in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. And what I need to analyze is to evaluate whether sales on markdowns within these companies are basically making money for our parent company. Once I get done, I'll be able, with this analysis, I'll be able to demonstrate to our leadership on things they need to do, or I could recommend to keep everything the way they are, depending on my analysis. Excuse me. So hopefully you could see the screen. So what I'd like to do now is begin my analysis. One of the first things I had to do was research my goals. What was I trying to accomplish? What was important? What's the burning platform? Well, as a business analyst for this global retail company, the most important thing I'm trying to understand is if our promotional markdowns at our store locations located in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York has an effect on the total sales for the company. In this analysis, I will determine if they're positive or negative, or one is and one isn't. Another area is my main purpose is to analyze the data to help our executives make smart business decisions to help improve sales across the company while continuing to make our customers satisfied. What is my intended outcome? What will the benefit be? It's to demonstrate that the week's weather and unemployment rates will affect the outcome of the promotional markdowns, increasing the sales across the 4 international store locations. If I am successful, then the benefit for the company is to illustrate that sales have improved based on these markdowns, making the company executive and stockholders satisfied with their current company's direction. What is my hypothesis? Well, it's based on my expected trends and differences between the groups that I'm analyzing. I expect the total sales of the company to trend upwards during these promotional markdowns. And I also expect differences between the promotional markdowns at each company based on the week of the year, unemployment rate, and temperatures within that region. My hypothesis is that promotional markdowns and sales generated in US dollars for Munich, Dubai, London, and New York will be significantly different based on the week of the year, the date the data was collected, and the weather during these periods, and the unemployment rate in each region, thus ultimately affecting the total sales for the company. However, as I went through this analysis, what I also evaluated was the hypothesis that the markdowns would have a positive effect on the total sales within each company. So we'll look into that a little bit more as well. So what data did I have to use to address this goal? Well, there was a lot of different variables that I could have taken to evaluate this on the importance of the company and these markdowns within these regions. But based on looking at the data, basically piece by piece, variable by variable, I chose the data from the promotional markdown and sales for each company, the data from the employment rate in each region. The data is important to determine if customers have the money to shop, so why not? What week of the year the data was collected to determine the effect when consumers are purchasing these markdown items. Does the temperature have anything to affect the people? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Will they go out and shop? And lastly, the data from the total of all sales for the company resulting from these promotional markdowns in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. The variables I choose to examine were Munich, Dubai, London, and New York stores, and that's a categorical variable. Markdowns 1 through 5, that's 5 different promotional markdowns, and the sales they generated in US dollars. That is a continuous variable. It's an interval. And then, of course, total sales, the sum of all the sales resulting from these markdowns. And then, like I said before, unemployment, which is a continuous variable. the week of the year, which is a continuous variable, or accounts variable, excuse me, and the average temperature in the region in degrees Fahrenheit, or a continuous variable. So what was important to me about these variables and what was my assumptions? Well, first of all, it's important to understand that each company is designated by 1, 2, 3, and 4. These stores are not numbers, and that's very important to understand when you analyze this information. Secondly, it's important to understand the type of variable you are analyzing, whether categorical or qualitative. Third, it's important to understand that these are time series variables, which is data taken over time. As I stated before, 52 weeks. Last, all but one variable I'll be using for my analysis is quantitative. The categorical variable is the international stores, like I said before, with the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. The other features of the variable is whether it is the correct data analyzed to determine my hypothesis. That's a good point to bring up now, because I also, when I was analyzing this data, I determined that holidays could have an effect on whether the dollar value was high or low. And would this create outliers in my analysis? And as we go on, you'll see it did. My assumption is that the majority of the variables will be used to determine my goal. Some important data to understand is that at first glance of this data, I believe I will have outliers for the money made within each company based on our promotional markdowns in these locations. There are extremes within the dollar value for each week by store, as you see below. Secondly, looking at the data, it might be important for me to calculate the CPI to determine the actual US dollars made. However, given the time period of the analysis, I don't believe inflation would have increased or decreased substantially looking at this data. As I went through my analysis, I determined this actually was a fact. I don't believe CPI played into my analysis one way or the other reviewing this data. So the steps I took to perform this analysis, first and foremost, I performed a frequency analysis within a SPSS on each variable. I basically wanted to determine if there was any missing data. This is important so I could qualify my variable data sets in my analysis. I also performed an explore analysis on each variable within SPSS to determine if there are any outliers or abnormalities within this data from each variable. And then I evaluated the total observations to ensure there were at least 30 plus elements to be able to perform a sample analysis when required. Based on, do I want to do population or sample analysis? Well, understanding the variables that I looked at, I decided on keeping it as a population analysis. So let's talk a little bit about the actual analysis I did before I get into recommendations. I chose the following test to complete my analysis to prove my hypothesis that sales of the company will trend upward during the promotional markdowns in the 4 companies. Frequency and explore analysis to determine if all my variables are valid within my data set and to determine if I have any outliers. I performed a correlation analysis to determine if unemployment rate, the temperature, and the week of the year when purchases were made affected Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. Then I performed an ANOVA analysis to determine the statistics within and between the Munich, Dubai, London, and New York variables to predict sales amongst each company during promotional markdowns. Finally, I did a regression analysis to analyze data of the 4 company sales during promotional markdowns and to predict if affected total sales for this business. I think it's important to understand it wasn't about the companies, but it was about the dollar amount from these sales and how they were affected. So the first test I did was a statistical test, was frequency analysis. Like I said before, I performed a frequency analysis to determine if there was any missing data within my analysis. As you see the results here, there were none. You can look at the statistics on the bottom of the SPSS output, as well as what I documented here. This is important now so I could qualify my variable data set in my analysis as I move forward. I also think it's important to understand at this time when I'm talking about my analysis is that I have a lot of SPSS output, and I have put them at the end of this presentation as backup slides in case you would like to look at that. If not, I will also be able to provide you with the SPSS output software. Before I performed a frequency analysis, I cleaned up the data within SPSS to allow a better understanding. I changed the decimal points to 2 with the dollar value, and I realized there was an error in total sales that did not include the sales and marked down 5 for total sales. What I did was I had to go in and fix this, so I changed the total sales to equate to all 5 totals from the markdowns. Then I performed a frequency analysis to better interpret the data for total markdowns and total sales. When I viewed the SPSS output, it caused me pause in a few areas that I needed to evaluate further. The first is the minimum sales and markdowns. It was actually a negative number. One would believe that sales during a markdown would be a negative balance. Would not be. I also determined that each area has a skewness above 3 that will have to be evaluated further except for total sales. The histograms that can be seen in my backup slides help understand the skewness better, as each markdown has what would be viewed as a potential tail. Lastly, by reviewing the statistical output below, one can see that markdown 3 sales were substantially lower than the other 4. This will play into my analysis and my recommendations as well. I chose to explore and analyze each of the variables that I will be using to prove my hypothesis. As you could see, I need to demonstrate that they are statistically significant. During my explore analysis, I had high values outside the expected range, as will be seen in the backup slides. This caused me to evaluate each outlier to determine why they exist within my data before I move forward. As you could see, there was numerous outliers on stores and markdown. Based on this data, I chose not to remove and replace these dollar value items in number 57, 161, and 5 until I can obtain additional information from each location. Stores and marks down in number 2, I chose to explore and analyze each of these as well, and determined that there was 5 more outliers, 52, 104, and 208, and 53 and 157. 52 and 104 and 208 were, damn, let's just go ahead.